This webinar, it's about the new normal. So we basically, I was talking about the last and the previous webinar. We did it. It was about all the solutions that you could implement to return to the lab safely. So right now, I just kind of wanted to give you an update of how those measures are being implemented and how the labs are doing. So since the last webinar, it was like a month and a half ago, we have been talking to a lot of labs around the world, onboarding whole universities actually. So I think we have a lot that we can share, and we will also give you a very real example from KCL, just so you know what kind of measures some people are implementing, and maybe you get some ideas as well for your own lab. So I'm just gonna go ahead and show you the agenda. So basically today I'm just gonna briefly talk about how and why the show must go on, then how the show is going on with the new normal in the labs, and I was also sharing some solutions, and then the real example from a big research center at King's College of London. So it's a big center with a lot of people that we have helped implementing BOOKKIT, but they also have some very cool ideas that are working really well, and they're also increasing the capacity now of the reopening. And then afterwards, we'll just have a quick Q&A. Please feel free to write the questions on the chat box. Make sure that you mute yourself. And if you have any comments as well, I'll be happy to take them as well. So without further ado, the scientific labs cannot be closed forever. I mean, I think this is quite straightforward to understand, that as a scientist, myself, if I were doing science and research, I couldn't really do it at home. And I have a lot of people that are scientists very close to me, and I know how they struggle for not being able to go to the lab. So they can't do it. They can't work from home, really. And then, of course, I think with the pandemic, especially, I think the societies are considering more and more the importance that scientific research has on our general society, and the importance of it, not only for the health and medicine sectors, but also for everything that is really related to improving our quality of life, the way we live, but also for how long we live. And some of the research activities that didn't really shut down during the lockdown and will continue operating are some of the studies that involve animals, for example. So animals need to be taken care of, so that there were still people going back to the lab. Also, especially because a lot of breeding lines of these animals are not possible to regenerate. So they really need to keep them and make sure that they maintain them healthy, because they're very important for the work they do. And then, of course, all the work related to therapies and treatments that cannot really stop, because a lot of lives depend on them. Things like clinical trials, for example, because COVID-19 is just a disease among a lot of them, such as cancer, neurological disorders, and so on. So this work really didn't stop, and it must go on. So from our side, we really want to help labs as much as possible to continue with their research, because we know how important it is. And then, of course, any kind of work related with COVID-19, it was considered essential work, so it never really stopped, whether there was a research for a vaccine or a therapy or testing. So basically, the conclusion is that scientists need to work, whether they are a PI that needs the research group to produce research, to apply for grants, to make sure that the group continues existing, and whether you're a postdoc that you need to publish, or a PhD student that has a thesis to complete. So the show must go on, and it will, but with a few changes. So this is where the new normal comes in. We know that things are not as they used to be, and they won't be as they used to be for a very long time. So we just need to adapt. Things can still happen the same way they were happening. We just need to adjust minor things, just to make sure that everyone is safe, but that the work can still go on. So the new normal in the lab starts by slowing down everything. So everything gets really reduced, at least on an initial phase, such as the capacity. So you will allow less people in the labs than usual. So there's labs running at 20% capacity, for example, just to give you an idea. Other labs at 50%, depends also on how big they are. And then, of course, reduce schedules. So normally, before the pandemic, we were allowed to work like overnights. There were experiments that really demanded scientists to work overnight or go to the lab on the weekends. Right now, what we see, it's a very limited schedule. Normally, for example, KCL example is only from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. So people are not allowed to do long nights or work on the weekends. And of course, they also have shifts in place to make sure that people contact with as few people as possible, and they also work in teams or cohorts. Then there's a lot of new safety rules and protocols in place. A lot of labs got physically reorganized to make sure that people could comply with the physical distancing rules. So they might have moved equipment or benches, and then also implemented circulation routes in the buildings. So they know that there's a specific way to get into a building or into a lab and a specific way out so people don't bump into each other. We see this a lot with signs on the floor or vertical signs. And then also protocols for isolation of suspect cases or even people that really tested positive. And then something that is very common right now, it's seeing hand sanitizer being provided pretty much everywhere as much as possible. So people make sure that their hands or gloves are disinfected so that it doesn't happen cross-contaminations. And then face coverings or PPEs are usually at least to enter and to leave the buildings mandatory, because that's where you increase the chances of bumping into another person. Then the access is really being controlled. So most buildings are accessible by card. So the administration is normally checking these weekly or daily sometimes to make sure that only allowed people can get access in the building. And then people also need to book shifts or the equipment in advance. And this is where a booking system comes very handy, because they just simply set a booking time, an advanced booking time. So people, for example, need to book at least with a week in advance or 3 days in advance. So basically the IT staff has time to check who needs access and who doesn't. So they can basically know how many people they should expect and if they are within the headcount limits or not. This is important, I'll mention later on, because of health and safety reasons. And then of course, only some people are allowed back. So there's still a lot of people from risk groups that are staying at home to stay safe, and still a lot of people, unfortunately, on furlough. Then last but not least, the training, it's super important. So people are aware of all the new rules and you make sure that they actually follow them. So these might be the tricky parts because people might be aware of the rules, but they don't always follow them. So you need to make sure that everyone holds other people accountable for following the rules, because this is everyone's safety that is at risk if they don't do it. Then having all the staff ready. So all technical staff should be ready, should make sure that there's also at least a technical person on site that knows how to react in case of emergencies. And then ideally, you could also train people remotely to become independent using equipment. So you basically reduce the number of people needed to operate an equipment. So that's basically the current scenario that we are seeing in labs, or what we call the new normal. So you can see a lot of differences to what it used to be before. And now, what solutions are people using to help them comply with these new rules? So first, it's the 2 meters rule. I mean, it's still widely seen in a lot of labs. Also only allowing a restrict number of people in the lab, and have lab spaces, specific lab spaces that are bookable, so people know exactly where they should go and stay while they do their work. And this also allows that they are physically separated from each other and that the lab is not overcrowded. Then we see a lot of labs using fixed teams. So there's really cohorts of people. Normally they use the research groups because it makes more sense to just give them different schedules, and they also reduced contact between different groups of people. Then again, the routes of circulation and the signs on the floor also ensure this distancing. Regarding health and safety, so this is super important right now, as you all know. The first thing on the list, especially during the months of summer, where the weather is usually warmer and some of the buildings use air conditioning. So it's really recommended that you don't use it because it might spread any particles in the air in case someone is infected. So ensure proper ventilation, but don't use air conditioning. Then cleaning is really increasing in frequency. So there's a lot of cleaning sessions going on, especially between different people's usage of a specific space in the lab or equipment. Hand sanitizer again, but then most importantly, collecting health reports. So up until now, I've never seen anyone in the university or in research lab conducting health reports. So asking people if they were feeling healthy, if they have any symptoms or not. So this is really this is a new thing that is going on, but it's important. So people are honest, and you can always have something that holds them accountable in case they weren't. Then some buildings, this may be a bit further down the line. You can see it in airports and other buildings, but some scientific buildings might also do temperature checkups, either using the security person with a manual thermometer or just thermal cameras. Then the creation and the scheduling of shifts. So on the right side, we have two examples. The one on the bottom basically assigns alternated schedules to a group of people. So they go in the morning on Monday, they go in the afternoon on Tuesday, and so on. This is not the most flexible one. And as a scientist myself, I really know that some of this research work, it's not really predictable, or sometimes you need to spend the whole day in the lab and you don't even need to go the next day, or you just need to go 2 afternoons or 2 mornings. So it really depends. So the most flexible way, I think it's the one on the top, in which you basically create bookable shifts. So on our system, you can create these as if they were equipments. The system is really flexible. It allows you to create them as if they were equipment, but they're just bookable items. So people can choose if they want an AM shift or a PM shift. And depending on how many shifts you allow, you can just list them there. And then someone that only needs a morning only books a morning shift. If they need a morning and an afternoon, they book both, and so on. So it's a more flexible way, and I think it's working better with most of the labs that I've been talking to. Then setting capacities. So from all the people that I've talked to, the most important number is the capacity. So how many people do you allow in a specific space in the lab at the same time to ensure that they are physically distanced from each other and that they can basically work at a safe distance? So I always ask people this: what is the maximum number of people that you allow there? Because this basically sets the limits for how many items or how many areas in the lab people can book to work in. So if it's 5, you divide the lab in 5 areas that ensure physical distancing, or if you need to create benches or bays, for example, you create them. So on the picture, we see an example with a maximum of 3 people. So we see 3 bays in the chemistry lab, and then basically people will be booking bays instead of booking an actual equipment. Then communication. So and updates, of course. So regarding this last thing about bays and benches, something that is really useful for the end user is for you to create just a quick floor plan to locate all the bays in the areas, because the organization is new. Basically, you can just build quickly on PowerPoint or Excel, just a floor map, basically just mentioning where each bay is located. So then when everyone goes to the lab and they book bay 1, they know exactly where to head to and stay there. This basically helps with a clear communication to your users, so they know exactly how the new organization is working. Then communicating clearly all instructions, keeping everyone updated in case something changes. For example, we see labs where the system is being implemented really well, the feedback is good, they can report directly to health and safety. They're happy with it, so they increase capacity. So this is also communicated through the system to people, so they know that more people are allowed in the lab. And this leads me to the other point, which is keeping track of the headcounts and run regular reports. I'll show you some examples later on, but basically I can't stress how important this is. I can't stress enough how important this is to the administration of any university, to know how many people are normally working during the day on a certain week in that specific building. So then you can just get the report, send them the report, look, I'm complying with the head counts, it's going really well, there are no positive cases, everyone is really happy, they're working, they could continue the research projects. And then basically that allows you to evaluate the situation weekly or bi-weekly and assess if you can just improve the capacity and allow more people in. So we have seen this in a lot of labs, it's working, and central administrations are allowing more people, increasing the capacity, which is really good. Then finally, this is something that I read on a Nature article and I thought it was interesting to share with you, which is basically just try to rethink and redesign the studies and the projects with the goal in mind. So the goal is that you get the most information, or at least the same information that you would get in a normal situation, but for the least effort possible, the shortest amount of time and the lowest costs. So I think you need to basically be clever in the decisions that you do. And one thing is really giving priority to projects that were already ongoing and they are close to get finished. So you don't start new projects or start trying new protocols that you know they are going to take a lot of work and a lot of time to be completed, or at least to get optimized. So our advice is that you basically use already established and optimized protocols to complete the current projects that you have. Then, of course, it's always a challenge, but try to automate as much as possible. And then if you can sacrifice some of your studies, luxuries, if possible, that would be also great because it reduces the amount of work that you have. And by luxuries, I'm going to explain this in a second. So using these example questions that you can just ask yourself, this is just really food for thought, but can you, for example, choose less time points than you have initially set it without compromising the study? So instead of doing 5 time points, if you do 3, can you still get a study that is valid from a scientific point of view? Then can you also complete the experiment in a shorter amount of time, for example? So instead of doing the experiment for 30 days, can you do it for 25? So there's already 5 days less that don't require you to be in the lab. Or at least you get advanced a lot faster in your work because you can start analyzing the samples, for example. And then one thing is some of the tasks where you know that you will be doing the same thing as other person in the lab. So if you basically, teams communicate quite clearly, and I can give you an example, for example, doing sections on the cryostat on specific samples, or just doing immunostainings. If you are doing exactly the same as another person in the lab, maybe you can guys pool some of the samples together and you only need one of you to be in the lab doing that. Of course, this is a trade-off, and then you would have to do the same for that person later on a different experiment. But this is just about basically teams coming together to reduce the risk, keeping everyone safe, but making sure that the work goes on. So this is just some questions that maybe you can ask yourself later and see if they make sense, if you can make your projects and studies less labor intensive, so you spend less time in the lab. And right now, more specifically, so I just want to quickly go through BOOKKIT and show you what KCL is doing with it. So BOOKKIT, basically, I mean, most of you probably know the system and are already using it, but you can have a really clear overview of everything that is going in the lab. It's a booking system, 100% online. You can have unlimited labs, equipment, and users. And then basically you can have people with different roles, with different equipment access, with different booking rules. It's super flexible. It's been helping a lot of people going back to the lab, and I hope it can help you as well. just some of the main characteristics. Again, it's 100% online, so you can just control it remotely and manage the lab from anywhere in the world. You can assign different schedules, which allow you to control also the amount of people in the lab. And then you can also upload all the SOPs, all the new safety measures, floor plans, pictures, and safety guidelines that will always stay on the system. People, when they are booking something in the lab, they will see it. It clearly communicates to them where that area is located, and everyone basically gets along with each other. Then the announcements feature also allows you to communicate clearly all incidents that happen in the lab. So everyone is aware of them and they get updated quite quickly. This feature also sends them an email, which is really useful in case they are not logged into the system. And then I'll show you this last point with a real example, but basically you can use it to track and trace all past bookings and check basically people that were in contact with each other in case there's a COVID-19 positive case. This has been revealing really important for health and safety departments. They really want to know if you have the capacity to do this in case something happens. I mean, fortunately enough, it didn't happen yet, and I hope it doesn't in the future. But basically, they just want you to have some tool in place that allows you to quickly track and trace in case something happens. Basically, just a safety measure, a preventive one. So going to the real example from King's College. So this is the Center for Developmental Neurobiology. So I want to thank Deborah Coles, which is the resource manager for the technical facilities there. She allowed me to share some of the slides that you're about to see. So thank you, Deborah. So the CDN, as it's known, was founded in 2000, so about 20 years ago. It's based at the Guy's campus in London. And they focus basically on brain development, circuit assembly, and also brain diseases. They have almost 200 people working in the building, or used to, of course, and about 21 research groups. So you can see it's quite a large research center with a lot of people to manage, a lot of people wanting to go back to resume their research work. So it was quite a challenge, but we're really happy that we're helping them. Everyone is slowly returning, and they're using BOOKKIT for it. So they were part of the pilot phase that KCL rolled out in the beginning in some labs. So it started in the 2 last weeks of June. And the goal was to open at a very reduced capacity and just test the system, test the new rules, and all the new safe procedures in place. So the schedule, it started from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. It's still the same today, as far as I know. And then the capacity, it's at 20%. So they're still doing it at a quite reduced rhythm, but it's working well. And we have been seeing other labs increasing capacity and allowing more people in. And they also are using shift booking, like I mentioned before. So everyone that needs to enter the building, it's mandatory that they book a shift. I'll show you how they look like. And every shift is of 5 hours. So they reorganized the labs. Basically, these are the benches that people use to work in this particular wing. And they basically have in place an alternated system of booking. So as you can see by the picture, you see that's no basically blue circle, which indicates a person or a working space. They made it on purpose so people never worked face-to-face with another person. So this person is facing towards this direction, and this one is facing towards this direction, and this one the other way around. So they're always working quite distance from each other and always looking at the back of the person in front of them. And you can see that they also have identified the benches by numbers, and they have them listed here. So basically when someone wants to book bench 10, they know exactly where bench 10 is and where they should sit. Then they're also doing room bookings depending on what they have in the lab. So apart from that wing with workbenches, they have rooms. The smaller rooms, because of their area, they have one person of maximum capacity right now. So you see them here listed as bookable items. So when someone books it, it books the whole room, and it prevents another person from booking, thus ensuring the one person maximum limits. And then for larger rooms, depending on the area, they run on higher capacity than the smaller ones. And sometimes it could be by equipments, but also by areas. So there are rooms where they have microscopes, which is the case here, but also specific dedicated areas for example, electrophysiology, that people can also work at the same time as others in the equipments. So for this large microscopy room, they have, for example, a limit of 4 people. Some might use the microscope, or others might use other areas in the same room. Then one very interesting thing that they have implemented was the first aiders and the fire marshals. This is basically was mandatory from the health and safety departments of the university. So first aiders, as the name indicates, basically they are people trained for medical emergency, and fire marshals for fire events. And because some of these people might be people from risk groups that are not in the building, they actually provided additional courses to younger people or people outside of risk groups that are already back in the lab. So they provided training for them for free. So they assure that there's always someone with that capacity on site. So, and what they did was quite interesting. So they basically are using FA and FM as identifiers of these people. And you can see here on the shifts booking of this lab, they just added FA and FM between brackets in front of that person's name. So they always know if that person was on site and at what time. And it also makes it easier to filter using the reports that I'll show you in 1 minute or 2. But I thought it was quite interesting to share as well. And talking about reports, finally, so basically this is just 2 examples that they use the reports for. One is to check when the first aiders and the fire marshals were on site, at what times, at what days. And then the second example is to track and trace a positive case of COVID. So the picture that you see below, it's a screenshot from our advanced reports feature. It allows you basically to select a date and a from date and a to dates that you can just analyze the report for. Then you can also aggregate by different things. So you can aggregate by users, by equipment, users and equipment, and so on. So basically what the aggregation function does is, instead of giving you a list of bookings, it gives you a list of what you aggregate by. So if you aggregate by users, it gives you a list of users. I'll show you some examples. But if you aggregate by equipment, it shows you a list of equipment. I'll show you how it looks like in a second. And then down here you have the filters themselves. So you can filter by equipment, by users, and so on. And then you download it, it gives you a nice organized Excel file with all the information that you have asked for. So first example, checking when first aiders and fire marshals were on sites. So basically in here, what we did was filtering by equipment or by room. So in this case, we just were concerned about the shifts, because that basically indicates if someone was on site. Because if you remember, everyone is, it's mandatory to book a shift in order to enter the building. So we always know who was in the building through the shifts. So in this case, we filter by room. So we know that all the shifts are in this particular room. And then we also filter by name of the user. And in this case, the name should have include FA and FM, or just FM or just FA. So the names here are hidden just for privacy purpose, but you can see basically on the right side when they were on site, in which day, and what time and for how long. So this is the reports that they're using to report back to the health and safety, so they know that there's always someone with this capacity on site. Then the second example is the COVID positive case. And this is just, I'm going to use it as an example. These are fake equipment names and fake people names as well that you're about to see, because this didn't happen yet. So there wasn't a positive case, fortunately. Hopefully won't never happen. But basically the first step, and this example basically takes Matt as the person that is tested positive. So we know that Matt is positive, Matt is at home already, and just self-isolating for 2 weeks, but we need to identify all the rooms and equipment that Matt used in the past 2 weeks, because that's obviously the incubation period. So we just ran a quick report. So we basically filtered by users. We chose Matt as the user, and then we aggregated by equipment. So we basically get a list of equipments that Matt booked for the past 2 weeks. Then we see that Matt used the microscope 1 and the electrophysiology room, which in this case basically could be a small room because it's listed as if it were an equipment. And we see that Matt basically used the microscope 6 times for the past 2 weeks, total number of 980 minutes, and then 2 times on electrophysiology room and 800 minutes in total, basically. So after we identify all the things that Matt basically used and the places where Matt were in the building, we need to identify basically all the other users that use the same things and areas in the lab in the past 2 weeks. So for this case, we basically just did another report. I mean, these reports take literally seconds to do. I'm just going step by step so you understand the workflow. So in this case, we filtered by equipments and we aggregated by users. So obviously the equipment that we used for filtering was microscope 1 and electrophysiology room. And then we aggregated by users to get a list of all the users that have used those 2 equipments in the past 2 weeks. Then we see that Peter, James, Marta, and Tim used it in different durations and several times as well for the past 2 weeks. So, and even though we don't know if they really used it right after math, and even if there was cleaning sessions in between, we're just playing it safe really and saying that Peter, James, Martin, Tim should self-isolate for 2 weeks. So that's basically how you can track and trace a COVID and self-isolate all people that might be at risk using the reports. So that is basically it from my side. I'm just going to leave here some important and useful articles. So the first one is the Nature one that I mentioned. But then you can also read one in our own blog and at other websites that I think are always useful. And we also have a dedicated page that is about returning to the lab with us, basically. So we're more than happy to help if you're interested. And then something that is new for us, it's our community forum. So we're basically, we started this last week and has a couple of questions already. But this is basically if you need support, that you can also write these questions on our forum. So unfortunately, you need to log in. You need to create a new account. We're still connecting both with BOOKKIT, so you can use the same credentials. But it's a really quick and easy registration. And then you can just post your question and we'll make sure we'll answer it there. This is so the questions and answers are recorded, and then the community can also see it, and that you can also talk to other users, maybe with similar problems. So that's basically it from my side. Thank you very much for your time. I see that we have, so now it's time for questions and answers and discussion. So I think we have one question. I think the other ones are not questions. So from Angela. So Angela is asking, is this type of room info available for first aiders and fire marshals to all users or just the facilitator of the room? So basically, Angela, not all users are able to access the reports. So it's just mainly the lab admin and the technician. And then we also have a role called instructor. So if they are responsible for all the shifts as well, they would be able to get these reports. So depending on the permissions that you set to the users, they won't be able to run the reports. So I think that answers the question. I'm not sure what kind of issues you had with the BOOKKIT system. I don't know what is the BOOKKIT system, but I mean, but if you're talking about other people seeing if they're on sites, they can see it on real time from the dashboard. They basically can see if there's someone with an FA or an FM on site on a certain time. Because if we go back to the calendar that I showed, wait, you see that there's a red line. Where was it? in here. So in here, there isn't a red line because this was on the 8th of July. But basically, if you log in into your account, you will see a red line on the present time. So let's say that it's noon on the 8th of July right now. There will be a red line right here. And then you can see exactly if there's anyone with an FA or an FM on site at that time. So that basically helps other people quickly just assessing if there's one on site that can help or not. Kate is asking when it will be available on YouTube, this video. So right after we are recording it, and my colleague will post it either today or just early tomorrow. So I don't know if there's more questions. You're welcome, Kate. No problem. So I hope this was, can we have the links again, please? If you're referring to this video, Sadi, we will send it to everyone that registered. Angela is asking, are there some videos for setting up permissions? I believe there are some videos about how the equipment access works on YouTube. And if you're talking about specific roles of the users and who has access to what, basically on the system, you can already see from the table when you try to add a user. If you choose a role from students to technician, you can see exactly what they can and cannot do. There's like a little check marks on all the things that they can do. And if there isn't, basically they can't do it, obviously. But if you have any questions about these permissions and the roles, please feel free to use the forum, really. It will be the perfect place to ask these questions. Okay, Angela. Just send me you can send me a private email with the specific issues that you're having. I'm sure they will be easily fixed. Thank you. Okay, Kate. Kate says, I'm a user. I'll be creating an account for the lab. I expect other labs. You recommend having one account for university for all labs or one account for each department? So this is a great question. Thank you, Kate. This will, I mean, actually, I also want to mention regarding this question, and there's also a very common question that comes up quite often. So it's about structuring the accounts. So if you have a university with several labs, and if you have, for example, a department head that manage all the labs, or at least needs to have an overview of all the labs, but then the labs are individually managed. So there's a lot of complexity in the way that the labs are organized. So we are releasing a new version on late this week, I think on Friday, late Thursday or Friday. So basically it will make it really clear. So we will have an organization level that allows only one person to be an organization admin. And then you can be a department admin that is responsible for several labs under that department. And then these labs can also have their own lab admins. So it really depends if you have people that are managing the labs individually, or if there's one person responsible for a lot of labs. So according to that situation, just let us know and we can help you setting up the accounts or the accounts, depending on what's best in your case. So I have someone mentioning a block booking function. I guess this is basic. So you can block times using the announcement feature. So it makes equipment unavailable on the system right away and no one else can book it. And you can also use the start times and the booking rules on the specific equipment to make sure that certain times of the day are not bookable. Depending on the case, again, we can have a look and help you setting it up. I don't know your name, sorry, it's STRQ8997. Alex, will the end user experience change after 2.5, the new version on Friday? So not really. So the user experience stays quite the same. User interface stays the same. The only thing that is changing slightly is the sidebar on the left side. And we will also basically making it easier, especially for people with long lists of equipment, so the dashboard doesn't get very messy. So we are introducing different dashboards. So we'll have your, what is called My Dashboard. It's basically where you see your own bookings. So after you book an equipment, the equipment will be shown on that dashboard, but you won't see all the others that you're not really interested in. And then if you want to see those, basically, there's a drop-down menu on the sidebar on the left that allows you to go to a different lab's dashboard and to see all of the equipments. So you will have basically your own dashboard with the equipment that you book, and then you will have the dashboards from each lab that you have access to. So that's basically pretty much what changes from the user experience, from the user interface side. Hope that answered the question, Alex. Okay, HF is asking, if a person has multiple BOOKKIT calendars for different labs that are managed by different people, can they view them all in a single dashboard? So, okay, so I'm assuming that you don't manage these labs. They are managed by different people, but you have access to all of them. So basically that is the same what I was answering to Alex's question. So with the new version, so right now you see everything on one dashboard. If there's like, if you belong to 3 labs and you have access to the 3 of them, and they have 100 bookable items, the 3 of them, basically you have a list with 300. And sometimes it's really hard for people to find the things that they care about and the ones that they want to book. So with the new version, HF, again, sorry, I can't see really your full name. With the new version, you will get your own dashboard. It's called My Dashboard, and you see basically your bookings. So the equipment that you book for yourself. So at the beginning, it will be empty because you won't have done any bookings, but then it will start filling it up with all the equipment that you normally book. And then if you want to see the individual BOOKKIT calendars, you basically just choose the lab that you want to see on the left side on a drop-down menu, and then it will show you the lab dashboard. I hope that is clear. So the single dashboard view that you're mentioning, it will basically be My Dashboard. So it's a dedicated dashboard just for yourself regarding all the equipment that you care about. I hope that is clear. Any other questions? I don't think I missed anyone. Hope not. No worries, HF. Sorry. I thought you were thinking differently than Alex. I'm glad that I could answer both of you then. Is there anything else? Any questions, comments, feedback? Anything is welcome. Thank you, Patrick. Stay healthy. Thank you very much for coming. So if no one has more questions or comments, I'll wrap up the webinar. So thank you a lot. I mean, we've been here 45 minutes. I think that's quite reasonable time. Don't want to take much of your time as well. Hope the webinar was useful. Just let me know if you guys are interested. You have my contact details right now on the current slide. Just send me an email if you have any questions or are struggling with anything on the system. Use the forum as well if you think the question is going to be useful for other users and if it's not really specific to your lab. And thank you very much once again. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Josa. Hope you enjoyed the system, Joanna. And I think that's pretty much it, guys. Thank you very much.